Hello, my name is Scott Bonds, and I'd like to welcome you to another edition, a brand new edition of The Lion's Den, where we restore kings one conversation at a time. Today, we have a very good topic that we're going to discuss, and we have Hope, and we have our guest here, Jamilla, and they're going to share some of their experiences in raising their sons as single women. Now, there's a difference between as quote-unquote single women, and there's a whole nother level of being a single woman when you're a black woman. And we're going to explore some of their journey and their experiences as they have been very successful in doing just that, but not without incident. They've had their challenges like everyone has challenges. And today we're going to talk to them about those things, and hopefully you guys can learn something, be inspired, motivated, and encouraged by the stories that they share. So I'd like to welcome Hope.
Hello, everybody.
And Jamilla.
Good.
So, what emphasis did you guys as women and mothers put on education for your children? Just tell us a little bit about what your experience was and how you presented the importance of education to your children. Hope, you know.
Okay. Well, I put a high expectation on both of my children to achieve goals a lot of times outside of their reach. But if you set the goals high, then wherever they may land, it's in a pretty good area.
Shoot for the moon, reach the stars.
I'm trying to think of that.
Something like that.
But my children did very well in school, but they had challenges. They had some learning challenges, and I did not let that determine their outcome. And so I stayed active in their schools to make sure that they weren't labeled and put in classes where it would under-challenge them. And so they graduated with honors, both of them, and I just continue to have high expectations for both of them.
Now, we talked a little bit about this earlier, and I remember you saying how you would go to the schools and sit in on classes unannounced. And from my experiences when I was in school, anybody's parents that showed up in a classroom, it caused you to panic and straighten up, and you'd be scared to death. How was that experience, and what effect do you think that had on your children and how they behaved overall in school?
Well, I experienced two different, as far as education with my daughter and my son. My daughter's education, it went kind of without incident. I mean, she had some learning challenges, but my son, which they tried to label him with behavior issues, and so that caused me to go unannounced and observe in classrooms throughout his education, to see for myself and observe what actually was going on. And that was very helpful to do. Did he like it? No. But I found success. The teachers were able to connect. They were able to call me instead of sending him to the office if there was a situation. So it is time consuming. It is a sacrifice, but it's well worth it. You have to see for yourself what is going on.
Absolutely, absolutely. Jamilla?
I would say mine's a little bit different. Coming from a family of educators, and education is not optional. And so when you look at that bar and setting that bar in terms of this is the expectation that we have in school, all I can do is lay that foundation out for him. My son had inattentive ADHD, so working with that and having to not want to put him on the medication, but finding other strategies that would help him to be successful, because again, as he got, just forward thinking as him getting older, what does it look like for him to be self-sufficient and not be reliant on a medication? So what things that we need to do to kind of adjust with that. But I can vividly remember, almost like what you said, Scott, my son went through the magnet school program, so I was very fortunate where we were able to get him into the magnet program that was based on science and math. And so when you look at the makeup of his class with him, like how many kids actually look like him, it was far and few. And I can remember an incident when he was getting ready to go in third grade, and third grade is that mark, which determines that pipeline for your child. And I can remember vividly, we were going to open house, my mother and I, And one of the things his third grade teacher at that time said was she knew that he came from a single family home, and then he was also an African American male. And she said, well, just make sure he gets his work done, because we don't want him to come back and the rest of the kids have all their work and he doesn't have his work. Mm-hmm. So imagine, mind you, at the time, I'm like 21, 22. Mm-hmm. And so my mother is there with me. Mind you, she's in Guilford County Schools as well. And you have the teacher telling you, because when she automatically, that lookism, looking at us and saying, okay, well, okay, he, not understanding the dynamics of where he's coming from, but automatically assume because he's coming from a single family home that he's not going to have his homework or he's not going to excel. And so that, I think, was like a light bulb moment for me, where it's just like, I can remember one of my teachers always said, never take a backseat to anyone. And so at that point, he used to say it all the time when I was in high school, never take a backseat to anyone. And at that point, I think it clicked, where it's just like, no, you're not going to take a backseat to anyone. And we have to politely, you know, talk to her and say, you know, even though he comes from a home that doesn't have a mother and father doesn't mean he gets less.
Right.
And so having to have that journey starting from third grade, just the importance of making sure we're pushing him and, you know, making sure that he had the opportunities to excel. Very fortunate for my mother to be able to be alongside with me, to be able to help him in that journey, but also just understanding the importance of education. Can I say he graduated with honors? No. Is that what I wanted him to do? Yes, but again, he had to chart his own path. And
Absolutely.
so, again, you know, me kind of being that helicopter parent or that overachiever, it's just like, I want this. So was he in the honors classes? Was he able to do that? Yes. Did he turn his homework in when he was supposed to? No. But can excel in test taking. And thus, that's one of the things with the internet. He can store information, but just the day-to-day, just basic routine stuff, and we struggle. But because I knew this, and because I worked with the teachers and was present, you know, that helped him to be successful, which, again, like you're planting seeds and you just never know what's going to come about of that seed.
Right.
Just to see when he got to college, I was like, oh my gosh, the very thing, this is what I wanted you to do. Throughout, you know, K through 12, he actually, it just clicked. And so, and being okay with that, because again, sometimes we can get into that comparison realm where it's just like, well, my child is doing this and my child is doing that, and I'm sitting back and I'm like, oh my gosh, am I a good parent? Did I do everything I'm supposed to do? So, but that part with the third grade, that just really just clicked for me. It's just like, never take a backseat to anyone. And so at that point, it's like, you know, quitting and failing is not an option. We're not going to do that.
Right, that's good stuff. I remember, you know, my parents were not together most of my life, but my father was always very involved with me. I would stay, you know, the summers with my dad, most of the weekends with my dad and everything. But the great thing that I feel like my mother kind of gave me was she allowed me to decide if I wanted to go to college or pursue another path to success. Many times, especially today, parents put so much pressure and emphasis on their children going to college. Like, you have to go to college. Like, college, that's not an option for you not to go. Like, was that the angle that you guys approached it from, or did you give that option? Because my mother always told me she really didn't care what I decided to do. What was important to her was that whatever that decision was, that I be the best that I could possibly be at doing what I chose to pursue. So what did you guys, what was your angle? Was college like the thing that you had to get? And let me just add, a lot of times parents feel like they are measured by how far did your child go from an educational standpoint. Like, sometimes parents can feel like they didn't do their job if their kids choose not to go to college and they just choose to get a job and start a career path that way, you know. And it's really, I don't really agree with that. I think that you instill the things that you need to instill in your kids, you do the best that you can do, and then once they become adults, it's on them to implement and execute the things that you've instilled in them. So what's your view on that?
If you were asking me today, I would probably do what you talked, like what your mother did, was just like whatever you do, just be the best at what you're doing. But at the time raising him, he's a black male. Not going to school is not an option.
Right.
So, you know, and I guess that's why the sense of urgency for me to say, like, you have to do well, you have to do this, we have to do, you know, you have to study, you have to do all this, because that's not an option, because what other option does he have?
Right.
If he didn't go to school, what was he going to do?
Right.
I mean, all through middle school, high school, he played sports. And it's unfortunate when they do look at children of color, if they see you at a certain stature, a certain size, they automatically think, oh, well, your son plays football, your son, you know, they can be an athlete. No, he can't.
Right.
I mean, let's look at the statistics of how many kids actually go off to even go and play on a collegiate level, let alone go and play on a professional level. So, no, school wasn't, that wasn't an option.
Right.
It was, it was school.
Right. How about you?
For me, the decision that I made for my children was because I worked so hard and they saw how hard I worked, I didn't want them to take that path. I felt that education would be a better option for them and give them more options than I had. So my father was military. He was in the Air Force for many years, and so their option was either the military or college.
Right.
Those were the only two options because I didn't want them, again, to take the path that I had of working my way up in a company through management. I thought education would be a better resource for them.
Right. Yeah, that's very good. That's very good. Okay, so I want to kind of flip it to a different area momentarily and ask the question, when you found yourself in the position that you were going to be single parents, raising these boys to become men, what role or what was your relationship with their fathers? Whether it was good, bad, present, not present, what were those relationships like, and what impact do you think it had on your son?
My children's father and I divorced when they were very young. Although we resided in the same city, he was not active in their lives. So what that did for our relationship is it made them appreciate the things that I did for them more. So they grew up appreciating and seeing how hard I worked and the sacrifices that I made and that I pushed them to be the best that they could be. So it just brought about appreciation. Did they miss him and did they miss having a relationship and getting to know him? I'm sure, yes. But again, it just made them appreciate me and want to make different life choices for themselves as well.
Right.
I guess my situation, I came out of high school pregnant. So in terms of thinking about, oh, I'm going to be a single parent, no, that was not my expectation, probably not, and not my mother's expectation. So it was one of those things where he had went off, it was that summer, as we were getting ready to enter college, and she's just like, no, you gotta call him. He was off at college. He had football scholarship. He left, so it was one of those like, what do you do? But very grateful that had I guess one would say a village, so to speak.
Absolutely.
So very supportive in the sense of my family and his family. That came together to be able to help with that. But in terms of, being present, but again, like I said, we're 18 years old, it's but so much you're going to know or what to do, because let alone, I'm still trying to figure out what what I'm supposed to do, so to speak. And so, when his father would, come in for break or something like that, he would have an opportunity, or I would take him to see his father, through his tenure in college, he would see his father, so he would get to know his father, but it wasn't later on, I'd say when we were probably in middle school, when his father kind of started to be more present. But again, he didn't live here. He lived 5.5 hours away from here, so that's very different. Yeah. Especially at that age when you go from being 18 to 19, you're still trying to figure it out for yourself, let alone you're having somebody else that you're accountable for, so. But grateful for his grandfather, his dad's father, who was very present, so he did have that male presence, whom he adores.
Yeah, that's very important. Was there any was there any challenges as you guys moved on with your personal lives? Like, you know, once you decide and you understand that you're not going to be with the father of your children or child, you know, you make the decision, well, I want companionship. I want to be in a relationship with a guy, what have you. Once people start to go in those different directions, it can sometimes cause a problem because, you know, when you imagine another man being around your son or your daughter and involved in raising them, and you don't even know this man, whether you chose not to be around as much as you probably should have or not, it still can be a hard pill to swallow. Did you guys experience any challenges with that kind of thing?
I would say yes and no, because like I said, very driven because I wanted to be self-supporting, and so was really into working and going to school full time. So trying to pursue any type of relationship with anyone else, that really wasn't the focus. And not only that, just being protective because I didn't want to be that person that my son saw a rotating door of men coming in and out of his life. And not even that. And I think sometimes now, like I said, just as you get older, you have the wisdom, but just knowing now that I could have probably stood my ground a little bit more, because the very thing that you said, where his father kind of unknowingly, I don't think he did it maliciously, but it's just like don't have other guys around my son, you know. But it's okay for you to. It's a double standard. It's okay for you to do it, but again, it's like, but you're not here, and you should know my character better than that. That I wouldn't have some, you know, wouldn't put my son in a situation that would be questionable, or for that matter, you know, if it intimidates you because you're not doing what you're supposed to be doing. But again, you know, like they said, the child brain does not form until 25. So again, the decisions that we make prior to 25, looking back, it's just like, oh my gosh, what was I thinking, or what was I doing? But very focused on my son from day one. That's my responsibility. He wasn't a mistake by no means, but I have to step up in it too, coming from a home where my siblings, I had him early, so my siblings are like 9 years old and 14 and 12. So again, coming from that dynamic, my mother raising the rest of my siblings who were still younger in addition to my son. So it just really wasn't, I didn't really have too much of that. Right. But then the fear, like I said, he kind of sort of instilled that fear. Like, I don't know other guys around. You know, it's just one of those things, like, don't have it, you know, you don't do that. Unspoken, so to speak.
I too was very protective. I didn't have anyone around my children due to trust issues, as far as, you know, men and someone being alone with my children. And so my children's father and I never had a discussion as to, you know, having relationships and other people around our children. But he soon after our divorce remarried, and so they had to have a relationship with his new wife. And, you know, again, I was protective. I focused on their education. I focused on keeping them busy and active in sports and working and just providing for them. So my focus was really on them.
Yeah. Well, I remember my first 2 children, I was not married to their mothers. And just like you all, I never wanted to give the example to my sons that it's okay to just have all these different women coming in and out of the house, spending the night and all that stuff. So my rule was that any woman that I was involved with, you couldn't come over, especially in the early dating process, you couldn't come over to my house until my kids were asleep. And you had to be gone before they woke up. So you couldn't spend the night all night. But what I did learn was that kids are very, very intelligent. They pick up on things that you have no idea that they're picking up on. And at the time, my girlfriend that I was dating at the time, she would come over, and she had a little red car, and she would park in the driveway. but my son's window, his bedroom window, overlooked the driveway. So one morning, you know, and I mean, I was on top of my schedule. I mean, I was making sure she could come until he was asleep. Before the sun came up, before he got up, she had to be out. So one morning he got up and he said, Daddy, whose car is that in the driveway? I said, what you talking about? He said, so he grabbed me by my hand, he walked me to the window, and pulled the shade up, and there was no car there. He said, well, there was a car there last night. It was a red car out there. So then I started learning I had to tighten up on my game, you know. But yeah, it's very important not to show the wrong things to your children. So I totally agree with that. So let me ask you this question, because this, outside of trying to date other people and move on with your lives, you know, a lot of times, not just that, but that can kind of accelerate the process or the potential that you end up in child support court with them sometimes, with the non-custodial parent. Some women take that route in a malicious way, you know, because they're hurt because that person didn't choose to be with them and didn't take care of their responsibilities, so forth and so on. Other times, it's just a matter of economics. And, you know, I always say the non-custodial parent is never going to do as much as the custodial parent. It's just not typically physically possible. Everything can't be split 50-50 straight down the middle. But when you're the one that's bearing the burden of the costs and expenses of all these things, a lot of times we feel like you need to be paying half of everything. So I personally had my fair time in child support court, and I think it's the worst place for a person, whether you're male or female, to be and find yourself in front of a judge. With my experience, you know, my kids stayed with me. They actually moved with me when they both became 12, but up until that time, typically on the weekends they stayed with me, and I was always very involved and active in my children's lives. Always have been, always plan to be. But going before the judge, if I got behind on my child support, the judge didn't care about how much time I was spending with my children. They didn't care about what I was buying them when they were with me. All they wanted to know was, why am I behind? Where is that money? And if I don't show up with some money, I am going to be locked up otherwise. You know, so did you guys have any experience with that kind of thing at all?
Unfortunately, I did, mainly because I had 2 children and I worked. I was in management, so and I managed a 24-hour business, so I had to work. And so they had to be in daycare because the majority of my family lived out of town. Back then it was $200 a week at the minimum, some daycares. And so that's hard for one parent to provide on top of living expenses, medical expenses, food, you know, clothing. So for one person to burden, to bear all that, it can be cumbersome. So of course, you know, you need help from the other parent.
Right.
And so we had our bouts with that in child support, yes.
Did that, well, you said he wasn't that present anyway, but did that make him even less present? Or was it still the same and it was just a matter of going through the child support system in general?
So his line of business, you know, he had long hours as well. So, you know, in order to make the sales that he needed, he had to work 10 or 11 hours a day.
Right.
So I understood that, but not every day.
Right.
Because my job also was very demanding. I was, again, in management of a 24-hour business. So, I mean, as their mother, I mean, I still had to do. If they were sick, I had to take them to the doctors. For school, I had to be at conferences and things like that. And so, yes, I understand your qualifications for, you know, your work and making a living, but understand mine as well.
Right,
so,
right.
Yeah.
And I guess mine, I mean, we went through the child support, but I guess it's different when you're not. Our child support was mostly out of state, so it was an out of state case, and so it's very different. And like you said, it's different when you live with somebody every day and you understand. And the way I tried to explain it to him several times is, imagine what are your basic needs. So imagine that's the same thing that your child has to go through as well. And so the same way that you feed, provide, and take care of yourself is the same way that your child needs to be fed, taken care of as well. But you don't really truly understand that until you actually have that lived experience. And so, and I think what kind of hit him is we went through a part because, like in North Carolina, you know, unless you have a custody agreement, both parents have right to that child.
Right.
And learn that the hard way. But it wasn't until my son got to high school when he went to stay with his dad for a year and a half where he realized, like, oh, it's a lot more than what you thought it was. You just think, oh, you know, he has his J's on, he's flash, you know, he was together. My son was always together. He was not ever not together. But that requires money. That doesn't just happen, you know. And like I said, very fortunate because my son was the first grandchild and first great grandchild, so was he spoiled? Yes, he was. But at the end of the day, it's not our parents' responsibility, it's our responsibility, and it's very different from a male versus female. And then, like I said, out of state. His dad is out of state. So it's but so much you can do or see until you actually have somebody with you, and then you realize, like, wow, this is a lot more than what I thought it was. It's a lot to take care of a child.
Oh, definitely.
I mean, especially if you want to make sure you're preparing that child for success. So, as you said, Hope, you know, everything from taking them, if you need tutors for school, you know, a tutor is not free. You have to pay for tutoring. If it's, okay, you're involving them in extracurricular activities. So, okay, my son did Boy Scouts. You know, he played his sports. That stuff is not free. You have to pay for that stuff. Even down to the point, you know, people think, oh, when school is out, then you don't have to pay for after school care. You have summer camp. You know, let's talk about the summer camp and the expenses that go in with summer camp, and let's talk about the snacks and the food and all the activities. And so until you actually have that lived experience, it's really hard for someone on the outside looking in to think, oh, well, if I have this, you know, I have my child every other weekend, or I get to see my child, and, you know, you get to do the fun thing, so to speak, because I always felt like I was the one that didn't get to be fun, fun parent. Like, yeah, it's fun to be able to do all that, and yeah, I might, you know, you might drop $100 here and there, but imagine, that's not every day, that's not everyday life. And not to mention, you throw in, let's say, you know, there's some health complications that your child might have, so they might be on a special dietary that's not cheap. So those things add, you know, they add up, and, you know, when you talk about the child support, let's talk about who gets to claim the child. And so you have that debate about, well, I'm paying child support, I should be able to claim the child. Well, let's talk about that. Like,
that's some real talk right there. I mean, real right
I understand where you're coming from with that, but again, until you are living with somebody and you see, and like you said, it's impossible for you to sit there and say, like you said, well, based off your income, this is what we feel that you should be able to pay. But that doesn't even hit the surface of what you actually come out of the pocket. And then let's talk about, like you said, the time where you're having to go and, you know, you are that chauffeur that's picking up and driving and doing this and trying to navigate a schedule and, you know,
getting them up in the morning for school.
Or if they get sick.
If they get sick. And I have been very fortunate where, you know, if my child ever got sick, it was either my mother who took off work or his other grandmother. So that was a saving grace right there. But there got times when he did get older where you children, just like you know the expenses of what it requires for you for day-to-day living. And I think sometimes if you're not part of that lived experience, you can look at it as, oh, you're just trying to get me to pay this money because you want this money to do, you know, to get your hair done, or, you know, you're doing this. And it's just like, okay, hold up. Like I do work. I'm not just sitting here just... You know, you have car payment, you have rent, you have just like the same expenses you have that, and imagine having somebody else with you, you know, so.
Yeah, I think it's typical, unfortunately, that men who are paying child support, we can often think that we're helping those children's mothers get their hair done, get their nails done.
But you're not.
And, you know, but that's the ignorance of a man or of a non-custodial parent, because you don't really, you don't always understand that, you know.
Haircut, you just talk about hair. you have a son, you
Yeah.
got to get a haircut.
That's right.
The haircut's not free.
No, it's not. No, it's not. And it can be a not so pleasant experience when a woman has to take her son to a barber shop.
That's right.
That's sending that woman into the lion's den, not this lion's den, but the wolf's den, I'll say, you know, and because it's a red flag, like, oh snap, she always bringing him in there. She must not have nobody, you know. So it makes men's ears go up, antennas go up, you know. Yeah.
But the Greensboro has some very good barbers.
Yes, we do. Yes,
Very,
we do.
very, very kind.
They understand. It's
Yes,
very
very
understanding.
kind. Family oriented.